Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back to another episode of the Your Gray Matters podcast. I'm Jason, and I don't know who I'm here with. Who is this? No glasses? What's going on?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jason. Well, I am Neil from the Your Gray Matters podcast, and I've recently had cataract surgery in one of my eyes next month, the second eye, but it has completely opened me up to seeing, and therefore I don't need glasses. Don't be afraid to get your cataract surgery done if you've been told to get it done. There's nothing to it.
Yeah, it's really remarkable what you went through and are still going through. And if you're curious about what Neil went through, then you can look at a short video on our YouTube channel. We'll provide a link for and you can check it out for yourself. But you could also say in a way that changing your glasses changes you, changes your personal brand. And that leads us into what we talked about on this week's podcast, or what you talked about on this week's podcast, personal branding. How did that work out?
You know, it was a terrific interview that I had with Paul Copcutt, who is recognized as a guru in helping business people brand themselves. That's a very different process from marketing oneself, and he does a great job today of explaining it.
Yeah, really, really interesting. There are a couple things that stood out to me, the model that he talks about and the way he starts off by getting to know his um, clients. And I also found it really interesting. I know some people don't. I know some people are scared off by it, but I found it really interesting about the AI process that you two talked about and how, like every other field, it's impacting his work.
Yeah, I have to say, Paul gives you a full circle of understanding when you work with Paul. And I'll tell you, he challenged me on my own thoughts and what I care about and what I think I'm all about. And I'm still thinking about it. He really is good.
That's awesome. Yeah. In fact, he asked you at one point, what are your favorite passions? Which I think is an intriguing way to start the process. And so, to everybody watching, I would say, what are your passions? Think about that. Think about the steps listed in the upcoming episode. Let us know in the comments how you would start this process. And please remember to click subscribe if you haven't, click like, leave that comment after the episode, and tell a friend about it. And other than that, I think we've covered everything. Ready to
Yep,
go?
ready to go. Let's go. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Welcome to Your Gray Matters, the podcast that unveils the miracles already amongst us. Here, we believe that the human mind cannot be defeated. Tune in to discover the fascinating people with extraordinary stories, innovative products, and groundbreaking services. With your host, Neil Silvert, who's earned his gray hair and still has use of his gray matter.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Your Gray Matters podcast. I'm Neil. I still am. No glasses, but it's me. And we're really excited to have you back. We hope that you had a great week. And we're really excited today. We have on one of the best people in personal branding, but I've known him for years. This is a real gentleman. He's a very smart man, and we're excited to bring him out to you today. Paul Copcutt, welcome to the Your Gray Matters podcast.
Thank you, Neil. Very excited to be here today. Thank you for the invitation.
And thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Everybody, let me tell you a bit about Paul because he is fascinating. He is the founder of his company called PC Unlimited, which I have to guess is Paul Copcutt. He's a personal brand and marketing agency that helps real estate business owners, entrepreneurs in general, and related professionals like myself. As you know, I'm a mortgage agent and I work in high traffic areas. There's a lot of us doing what we do. And Paul, he works with people to help them identify what makes them unique and then shows them how to leverage and communicate that for their own professional and personal services. He's developed a system called the REI three-step personal branding model, and that is to increase your visibility, credibility, and frankly, revenue in your industry. I have to tell you, Paul was an early winner in this. He was one of the first half dozen speakers on this topic of personal branding. And he's globally certified to be able to do this for people. And it is a personal brand strategist certification. And he's also certified, and we're going to touch on this today, to use the world-leading personal brand assessment called 360 Reach. Very accomplished man. He firmly believes that marketing might be how you get someone's attention, but personal branding makes them choose you. And there's the difference that we're going to learn about today. Paul, welcome to the Your Gray Matters podcast again. We are really delighted to have you on.
Yep, excited to be here, Neil. Looking forward to our conversation.
So, Paul, before I ask you a little bit more about yourself, because you are very interesting, just so everybody understands, what's personal branding? Why is it important? Why is it more than marketing, as we said in introducing you? So perhaps talk to that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing is that everybody listening to the show today already has a personal brand. The key is understanding what that brand is, okay, and then how do you best communicate it to the people that you're trying to reach. And personal branding really has come from the marketing and branding side of business. It's the same process that you would apply to a product or a service, but you're applying it to a person. Mm-hmm. So you really are trying to understand, what is the core foundation of your brand, you. So that would be things like values and vision and purpose and passions. And then how do you kind of package that, for want of a better description, into a unique selling proposition for you to position yourself as the mortgage agent, as an example for you, versus, as you mentioned, the hundreds or thousands of others who also they do the same thing as you.
Right, right. And Paul, how did you get started in this? What is it about your background and your interests that took you into this personal branding field?
Yeah, it's funny. I just did a post very recently on LinkedIn about this, where I first sort of came across it. I was in my background is sales and marketing, and I was actually having dinner with a friend in the UK when I lived in the UK, and he mentioned this book called Brand You 50 by Tom Peters. And Tom Peters, a couple of years before, had written a very iconic Fast Company article called The Brand Called You. And it was really the first person that had put it out there in any way to kind of position this idea of being a brand yourself. And this was 2003, maybe even earlier than that. Maybe it was even earlier than. And Peters, actually, the first time he presented this, funnily enough, was to the British government. I met Tom Peters a few years later and asked him how he got into it, and he presented it as an idea to the British government, and they just laughed and threw him out of the room. But
doesn't surprise me.
it certainly resonated more with people in sort of the corporate world. And then I was in recruitment, and I was coaching candidates as to how to stand out in an interview. And I started to use this personal brand approach. And one of the candidates turned around one day and said, "Could I pay you to continue coaching me on this?" I thought, well, yeah, I guess so. And that's how it all started. That's how I got into doing personal branding as a business, and then slowly transitioned from recruitment, stopped doing recruitment, and then continued to do personal branding for individuals, inside corporations, running workshops, doing presentations at conferences, and that's how it all took off.
So it seems to me, and that's when you founded PC Unlimited, which is your company. And of course, we'll be posting your website and things like that for you and for all of our viewers. Thank you. But Paul, it seems to me what you're doing is you're working with people to help them bring the best part of themselves out so that they can tell people about themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Neil. I mean, and that is the thing. I think that raises a good point, is it's not about trying to be somebody you're not.
Right.
I mean, maybe somebody that you're aspiring to be, that might be a little bit different, but I see it often, and I cringe every time I see the phrase "fake it till you make it."
Mhm.
It does concern me when I see people thinking that that is the way to go about presenting a personal brand. It isn't. It's, what is that brand? Where do you want to get to? And how do you make more of your brand attributes visible to people so that they can start to see you as that brand?
Sure. Sure. And that makes sense. I've always believed that you're probably the best one to be you because that job's taken. You're you.
Right.
One of the reasons for this podcast is that we truly believe that the human mind cannot be defeated and that every single mind has something to offer. So get to learn yours and learn your personality. And with someone like you can be helped to bring the best of that out to your clientele, your family, to the world.
Right. And it presents, and again, this is a little bit of an overused word, but it does capture the best way to kind of the essence of what personal branding is. It's authenticity. It's permission to be yourself.
Yes.
That's bottom line.
I love that. I tell people in my mortgage business, I understand mortgages, but I'm not the best guy to underwrite them. I have a team for that. I'm good at listening and conceptualizing what you're looking for. I'm interested in you. For me, that is my personality, and I've found that for me, that really helps. But it took me quite a while to learn that, actually. And I had professionals who helped me get, if you can imagine, sort of a grasp of who I am.
Right.
And I think well, I know that you do that very well, actually. But you also said, and this is interesting in your bio, you're certified. And who certifies you? What's the structure of this whole industry?
Yeah, so it's a little bit like, who certifies coaches, and there is a little bit of a misnomer is probably not the right word, but there was somebody I came across very early on, a gentleman called William Aruda, who had very similar. He got influenced by Tom Peters' article and started down this personal branding route. And he'd taken it to a point where he developed a process and steps and tools to help people identify what their brand was. And then he took it a stage further and said, well, I could start, rather than, he wanted to reach millions. So rather than his trying to do that all on his own, he decided to engage other people, coaches or strategists, personal brand strategists, to do that thing. So take his process and go do the same thing. So he announced it, I think I'm pretty sure it was on Twitter or something on social media. I immediately emailed him and said, yep, count me in, because I figured, yeah, I'm kind of working my way through it, but if somebody's already invented the wheel, why do I need to reinvent it? Much quicker, because that wasn't the thing. I didn't need to own a process or a system or even a certification. I wanted to help people brand themselves. So that's what I did. I signed up for his certification. I ended up actually running it for him for a number of years and certifying other people. I probably certified 50, 60 people across the world in personal branding for him. And then the other thing was, which you'd mentioned in my introduction, is the 360 reach.
Right.
So there's only 2 personal brand assessments in the world that I'm aware of. It's called How to Fascinate by Sally Hogshead, and that's a very good personal brand assessment. There's a great book that goes along with it. The only thing with Sally's assessment is that it's purely a self-assessment. And as with any self-assessment, the answers are only as good as how you felt at the time when you filled it in.
It's very subjective.
So, I mean, I've done things like Myers-Briggs, and I think I come out differently every time. So they're not perfect. Whereas Williams' one, the 360 reach, actually goes to other people anonymously and gets feedback as to their perceptions of your brand. So they ask questions like, what words would people use to describe you? What skills do they think you have? What's your greatest strength and why? What's your greatest weakness and why? And then they actually compare you to objects, which people always kind of hesitate and go, ooh, that doesn't sound right. But it's interesting because you're given the option of being compared to a car, a cereal, a breed of dog, or a household appliance? And people say, oh, yeah, that's a stupid question. And actually, you see it sometimes when people are filled in the responses, they say, stupid question, I'm not going to answer this.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many times I've sat down with clients and gone through that part of the assessment, and we've lifted out taglines, we've lifted out names of companies. We literally, people's feedback is amazing, but you also see a lot of similarities. And sometimes people can't find the right word to describe somebody, but they can say, oh, you know, Neil's a Volvo because he's safe and reliable and I can trust him. And I had a client who was a consultant, and 85% of her respondents came back with BMW, Mercedes, or Porsche.
Wow.
And the comments were well engineered, great systems. You pay, you know, you would expect to pay more for this. And immediately we went out and upped her prices by 15%. And nobody blinked an eye. Nobody.
Wow.
So the 360 really can, and the attribute side is also key to when you go to describe and package your personal brand, because there are a set of words that people will use to describe you, but they'll also use them to describe other mortgage agents and brokers. So, for example, trust, I would imagine, would be a word that you would want in a good mortgage broker, or trust and you know, something like accurate or knowledgeable. You know, and we see that all the time. I see it with realtors all the time. I just laugh every time I see a realtor that says trust is part of their, you know, tagline or something. Well, I'm not going to hire an untrustworthy realtor to sell my house. So,
yeah.
So those are what I call the table stakes. They get you in the game, they get you considered, but they don't differentiate you because everybody else is saying the same thing. But if suddenly we said, and you mentioned yourself, Neil, that you like to get to know people. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's, you know, maybe one of your attributes is caring.
Yes.
Or analytical, or maybe it's, you know, maybe it's quirky, or maybe it's something like that. But those are attributes that you would not necessarily need to be a good mortgage broker, but they differentiate you. And those are the ones, those are the emotional attributes that we want. So if anybody thinks about brands that they know and love, you know, Apple is, you know, Apple produces a phone and a computer, and so does 10 other companies.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't why you buy Apple.
Right.
And Apple is about the emotional connection that you have to that brand. And even when you see other people with an Apple laptop in a Starbucks, you kind of nod to them because you're in that tribe. And that's the emotional connection to a brand. And it's the same for personal brands.
So, Paul, what I hear you saying then is when you work with a person, you're looking at their attributes, you're taking into consideration what existing clients or people know about them and are willing to tell you. Yep. And I think it's more than just sitting with Paul like in a counseling session. At the end of it, we've drawn out everything's fine. What I'm hearing from you, this is probably an ongoing process as a professional develops themselves into their own industry. I don't know if I said that right, but it sounds like an ongoing process.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll have people that think they know what their own personal brand is, and then we get that feedback and there's a disconnect.
Uh-huh.
And then you're having a conversation around, okay, why is there a disconnect? What do we need to help move you towards that if that's where you believe you are, but you're not? Or if people have got that impression and that's the wrong impression, how do we change that impression? And sometimes we'll go back and do a 360 6 months or 12 months later to see if our actions or our activities have changed that perception.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I certainly spent some time over the years reading books like How to Win Friends and Influence People and you know, those kind of books. And I know that you're a great reader. I'm going to come to that. But Paul, it taught me that even the numbers business, which is what mortgages and real estate are, they seem to be just about numbers, but they're not. They're about people's lives and joys and goals and dreams. And I think that must be part of your process, is really understanding who that person is so that they can even express themselves to others. Does that make sense, or am I wrong on that?
No, you're totally right as well. Yeah, vision, purpose. You know, your vision, what's your bigger vision for the world? Purpose is more about what is it that you want to do to help affect that bigger vision. Mm-hmm. And then values. Values is a core part of a brand foundation. And then passions. Passions is passions is the fun part. And again, some people kind of avoid this,
Mm.
but if you've got a passion for, well, what are your passions, Neil? Tell me a little bit about what you like to do outside of work. What are you passionate about outside of?
Well, you know what? I love traveling with my bride, Linda. We love just hanging out with the grandkids, but I really love interacting with people, Paul. So I have some other businesses that I run, and they always bring me in contact with people and their dreams and goals and where they are. And that's just a big part. It's just something that I love to do. But it's helped me in all areas, actually caring about someone else and really caring about myself too.
Right. And so you could take, say, your travel passion and incorporate that into part of your social media posts, part of your stories to people, so that then I start to see, well, okay, Neil's not just a mortgage broker, he also enjoys traveling. Well, I like traveling, so maybe they have a conversation with you about traveling before they even start to talk about, I'm thinking of refinancing.
Sure, sure. And I have to say that even being on the mic for me, doing the podcast before COVID, I want to talk about COVID to you. I was on stage a lot as a motivational speaker and a real estate pitch guy. And I just loved the talking to the people.
Right.
And I didn't have to worry at that point whether I had a sale or not. I was just looking for people saying, I feel better. And the podcast seems to be doing that too. But Paul, let me ask you, talk about the landscape of personal branding. How has it changed? And a lot of my speakers lately on our show have talked about interesting changes in their market since COVID. And I'm wondering what you've seen changes, and has anything major changed since we exited our houses after a year of sitting in our houses?
Yeah, I think, well, you've probably found this from, I'm sure, from other guests, and probably found it yourself as well. People are craving personal connection again.
Yes.
That's we saw a big spike after COVID. Once people were comfortable going and meeting in person again, conferences, meetups, get-togethers, even social gatherings, went off the charts. I think that's starting to settle down now, but I think people have realized that that's such a part of who we are as humans anyway.
Yes.
Having personal connection. So I think that's one. I think what I have seen, when I was first involved in personal branding, Twitter had just started. I think I was one of the first 150, 160,000 people on LinkedIn. There's 1 billion people on LinkedIn now. I was very early. And now you see people leveraging social media to the nth degree for their personal brands. And we saw that accelerate during COVID because how else people do it. And I think we're still seeing a lot of that. There's a lot of noise on social media, so it's hard to stand out. And personal brand can help you do that. But I think that's probably a lag of social media, or lag of COVID. Is social media is still pretty heavy for personal brand building.
It's really interesting, Paul, because yesterday I spent a couple of hours. I drove from my city, Hamilton, to the far end of Toronto, and I sat down with 3 business people, and we talked about how we might put our services together, my mortgage, and they're in a different part of the financial world. But what we all found was that we were having fun just being people talking and learning about each other. We found out that these 3 people, and I think that this is intrinsic to our discussion, Paul, everywhere you look in the office is Godfather stuff from the movie, and an actual cutout statue of Robert De Niro and all this kind of stuff. The owner just happens to love The Godfather, but we got to talk about the fact that my mother was an extra in movies and she spent some time with Robert De Niro. That doesn't really happen when you're talking on a Zoom call if you're trying to establish relationships. I think relationships is the key word, is it not?
Yeah, relationship and being open to that, Neil, because you can walk in, you've probably been in meetings where people walk in and they are so fixated on the sale or the presentation or whatever it is that they're there for, that they miss all the signs and the signals to actually make a connection with something.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, being open to that, being aware, listening for, what is it, the famous saying, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should be listening twice as much as we're talking. So
yeah, and I have 2 eyes, and one of them actually works now. So, Paul, I want to drill down a little more on your REI three-step personal branding. So a person comes to see you. Could you walk through just a little bit of some of the steps that you would do with the person and how it benefits them? Let's take real estate.
Yeah.
How would that work?
Yeah. So, I mean, it really doesn't. I mean, REI is obviously an acronym that kind of connects to the real estate space, which is the reason I did it. But the process is the same for anyone. We've probably covered quite a bit of the first step, which is reveal and research. So that's all about learning about the values, the passions, the vision, the purpose, looking at target audience, looking at who your competitors are. So doing some competitor analysis and how are they positioning themselves. So that's kind of looking at brand foundation. It's doing the 360, getting to understand what are your unique, differentiators from that, and then looking at market focus and differentiation. So that's the first part, reveal and research. We then get into engagement and explanation. So that's about messaging, that's about building relationships, looking at what mediums that you want to be present on, what social media platforms, website, logo, taglines, all those kind of things. And then the final step is influence and impact, which is about communication, connection, spending time on social media, not just posting and ghosting, but posting and engaging.
Mm-hmm.
Thought leadership, philanthropy, going beyond that. And then obviously measuring and, is that having an effect? Is what I'm doing there? Maybe doing a 360 again, as I say, in 6 or 12 months. What a difference have I made? And personal branding isn't a one and done thing. It's part of who you are. So it's going to evolve. It's going to change.
But I think that that's a very important message that you just gave to people who want to do personal branding. What you find today might be different in a year from now or down the road. So it's an ongoing process, as are many things that we do consistently in business, because being consistent is one of the great secrets of success. Yep. So I think that that's where you come in really well. And you're looking for the uniqueness of that person, as you said, and then finding the best way to leverage that uniqueness. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah. So somebody like a real estate investor, quite typically is looking to raise extra capital. They've maxed out at the banks or the credit unions, and now they're looking at private money. So how do they position themselves, to attract that? And what are the strategies that they can do from a social media perspective? What's allowed, what isn't allowed? Yeah. So those would be the kind of things. Or, a realtor could be, a realtor I find realtors are very much more about the external image and getting their message out there. So they're a little bit more focused that way. Whereas obviously I find real estate investors don't necessarily feel a need to do all of that. So.
Exactly. I've found I've had the privilege of getting to know over the years, really know more than 50 real estate specialists. Some are investors, some are in the sale, most are in the sales end, some are brokers. When I do thinking about if I'm connecting people, and everybody wants you to connect them with somebody, what goes through my head is personalities. And I've spent a lot of time developing my own knowledge of personalities. So if someone's detail specific, my way or the highway, I have certain real estate agents that are absolutely going to satisfy that client's requirement. The other person is, no, I just want someone who's hospitable, I'm not knowledgeable, maybe needs a bit of a sense of humor. I have certain people I turn to for that. And the only reason I'm saying that is because I think it's very exciting what you're doing, because it helps consumers really understand the uniqueness of your client, their private branding, and if there's already going to be a comfort zone when they reach out to them. I don't know if I'm right there, but that's how I'm perceiving what you're saying.
You're right. And people should be okay with the fact that their personal brand is going to repel some people. You're not for everyone. If you try to be, you'll end up being very vanilla.
Yes.
That doesn't serve you, because again, we go back to, what is it in Hamilton, Burlington, there's 2,000 realtors. So I've got 2,000 people to choose from that could sell my house.
I know. And don't even have to remain in that city, in your own city nowadays either. So
Right.
quite remarkable. I love what you're teaching me today. I hope the rest of you are enjoying this. Paul, do you have any, without names, of course, can you think of any real big success story that you've had that you'd love to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, well, I got involved in real estate investing. It wasn't, I'll be honest, it wasn't a market I was looking at. And that's the interesting thing. I think that's part of being, that openness to, well, maybe there's something here and it's worth exploring. I've started, with personal branding, I've done everything from helping job seekers to corporate executives to, to real estate investors. And there's a good example of how a personal brand can change, because the way that you position yourself is different for each one of those groups. But it was actually a real estate investor who found me. They found me on LinkedIn. They liked what I had as my profile, and they said, you look like you know something about branding. Can you help me with my brand? And I thought, real estate investor. I'd done some work with realtors. I'd worked with 2 or 3 of the large realtors, like top 1, 2, top half dozen with Remax, Royal LePage, but not real estate investors. And the interesting thing I find with real estate investors is they're a group that are willing to invest in themselves as well as invest in properties and portfolios. And so this particular real estate investor, they had a podcast, but they didn't have a business card, they didn't have a website, very limited social media, and then worked with them to start to build an email list, which I'll talk about in a little bit in a second. But we got business cards, we got the website out there, we started to get sponsorship for the podcast, and then we basically took them from, they had a full 9-to-5 job that they were trying to get out of, and probably within 2 years, we'd replaced their corporate income with additional income from beyond their real estate portfolio. So sponsorship, coaching programs, other things that generated revenue. So they were able to quit their 9-to-5 and go full-time into real estate.
And isn't that the best? For them, if that's what they wanted, then everybody's happy, and that's marvelous. Paul, I remember when I was studying marketing as a kid, so it's a long time ago, but I remember that marketing wasn't sales. Marketing was a part of sales and success, and it fits in to if you can imagine a closed circle of the sales circle, marketing is a part of it. I imagine that personal branding is also a part of it, where you want to go, but marketing and personal branding are in fact different from each other. They're tools that work together, but what you're suggesting to me is they're not. If you're marketing, you're not necessarily doing personal branding. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the way I see it is that marketing is more of the activity. It's more of the, it's more of the activity to get the message of your personal brand out there consistently, clearly, constantly. So you're constantly working at getting it out there. So the two go hand in hand. But if you're not clear about what that brand is, then there's probably no point in marketing it, because as Donald Miller says, you confuse, you lose. So it really is a case of get clear on the brand, and then you can do the marketing and sales piece.
Yeah, and you've brought that across so beautifully, and I thank you for that. I'm already thinking of things I can do very differently. Paul, you're a strong reader. I read on your LinkedIn profile that you're addicted to business books.
I have an incurable addiction to business books. Yes.
So
if I took my camera and took you around a couple of angles, you'd probably see, and I'm looking at them now, probably 150 books at least.
So let me ask you, what ones are you thinking about right now? What might you recommend to people, if there is a specific 1 or 2 or 3? Like, where do you go with books these days?
Yeah, so probably 2 books this year that have made a difference for me. The first one is Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. So Dan Martell's a BC-based SaaS, software as a service entrepreneur. He's built and sold SaaS companies. I followed in the book I followed his, what he calls email GPS. So how to deal with email. So now I don't touch email. My virtual assistant touches email first and then sorts it or deals with it. And then I get to see the emails that I need to see. And that's made a huge difference just in productivity on a daily basis. So buy back your time, Dan Martell. And then I just recently read Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. I don't know if you know the Netflix show The Bear.
Yeah.
With Jeremy White, but one of the characters had it in the restaurant. It's based on a restaurant. And Will Guidara was a partner with Danny, well, I'm trying to remember his second name, the guy that started Shake Shack and a bunch of high-end restaurants. And he basically, it's all about customer service and going above and beyond. And some of the stories in that book, and it's got dozens and dozens of great one-liner kind of leadership, customer service quotes, but the stories in there are phenomenal. That what these people were prepared to do to impress a client in one of their restaurants was just phenomenal. And you think, you've been to good restaurants and you always have great stories when you go to restaurants, good and bad. But these ones are just 5-10 notches above anything I've ever heard.
Well, I've heard and I've learned over the years that leaders are readers and readers are leaders. And I never would have believed, Paul, that in 1996, I heard a gentleman speak from stage. His name's Paul Zane Pilzer. He's sort of the anti-economist, even though he's an economist. And I heard him say something that now that you hear on my show, which is that the human mind cannot be defeated. We will always find a way. And that was his whole passion. That was 1996. That stayed with me to this day and helped me to create a podcast. And in real estate, it's funny, my bride Lynn and I, we were lucky. We got to learn directly from Robert Kiyosaki when Rich Dad, Poor Dad was the big Bible.
There's a great example of a personal brand that's built around a framework.
Yes.
And you just mentioned as Paul Zane Pilsner, and he was the anti-economist.
He is.
That's a personal brand. That's
and
people were doing it before the label was even there. We just need something to hang on to.
It's absolutely true, Paul, and that's why I wanted to bring that up, because I find it so fascinating that something I learned years ago, all those years ago, had propelled me to where I am now. But it's like basic principles that you can learn from reading that you may not just get in a conversation with someone. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know part of your greatness is the fact that you're a wonderful reader and you learn from them. Paul, how is AI going to change personal branding? Are you finding things already?
For sure. I'm using AI more and more each week. It's again, you need to use it correctly, just like anything else. It's a tool. It's not a replacement. I'm not one of the doomsayers that thinks AI is going to replace everybody and everything, but it does help in terms of it just gets you to a point faster. So I think the danger is that people are going to rely too much on this, and we'll start to see, going back to my comment earlier about being vanilla, you'll start to see vanilla posts on social media, and then you'll start to be able to see. I've already started to collect a list of words that AI produces that is so obvious it's AI.
Yeah.
Realm, R-E-A-L-M, who uses that? And seasoned. If I see people have put seasoned in their bios, I typically go, no. So when I'm putting stuff in AI prompts, I'm saying, do not include these words.
Yes.
To generate, because otherwise I think you'll see vanilla posts and everybody will get bored. So it was interesting. I was reading an article just this morning about this from a personal branding person in Australia, and they said with the advent of AI, personal branding, the personal connection of personal branding is going to be even more critical.
Mm-hmm.
So
it is.
I think that's the thing that's underlined it.
Well, now you're going to want to stick out as a human being versus technology that comes from online. It's fascinating. My son, Jason, who people see on the show, he's building our back end right now with AI. And it's fascinating because he spent 2 days just trying to figure out how to get AI to listen to him so that he could give it the prompts.
Well,
And
and that's the skill that, if you anybody listening with young kids or nieces or nephews, if you're thinking about what are the skills they need to develop, it isn't knowing how to do an Excel spreadsheet anymore. It's how to write clear prompts. Because if you know how to write clear prompts, then you'll get the right results from AI. It's a classic, it's the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. So if you put in good things into AI, then you'll get good stuff out. I literally had a conversation with ChatGPT the other day. So I gave it some prompts, and then I said, now interview me based on that. And so it asked me the first question, I gave it the answer. It even said, could you clarify that? That's not quite clear. And then it asked me the next question. And then, so it was like an interview. So I thought,
so I did something yesterday with you actually that I've never done before. This is not the base AI system. We purchased a little higher end one for what we're doing. So I actually took the bio that you sent to me. I didn't even know I could do this. And I put it into the system. I copied and pasted in the system. I said, so now give me a 5-star interview with Paul based on only what you read and perceive from Paul's bio. And it came out, some of the questions we use today, I mean, I know you and I like to do the human stuff, but I was blown away because I could not have counted to 30. And it had read it and come out, and the questions were good. They were interesting. But I still go back, Paul, to the fact that yesterday I also spent 3 hours in a car going back and forth somewhere because I deemed it worthwhile. And the sitting around and talking as people was huge because a relationship was started. I still don't think that you can do that online in the same manner.
and AI will never, well, let's hope AI never.
Yeah, I'm 70. I don't think I'll have to worry about it too much. But Paul, this has been wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in Paul Copcutt. We met many years ago, and we both have been involved in real estate investing. But what Paul does well is that he builds relationships with people, but builds into that relationship wonderful skills, rewards for you, rewards for Paul. And I want to encourage you to reach out to Paul if you want to get your personal branding up to speed or to even learn how to put your best foot forward to learn how to do it. Paul, how shall people find you?
But the easiest place, very simple. My website is paulcopcutt.com. So that's COPCUTT. Or any of the social media channels, all of them are at Paul Copcutt.
Wonderful. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, when you go online and you look up Paul, including his website, you will find some really interesting things. If you're looking to upgrade your personal branding, or you've just today went, oh, personal branding, what's that? Better look into it. Go on to Paul's social media, then get a hold of Paul. It's worth your time. Paul, thank you so much for coming on to Your Gray Matters. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a blast. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I'll see you again, I'm sure, out on the circuit. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a great week. And as usual, we'll be back next Monday with another Your Gray Matters podcast. Have a great week.